Hey there, it's Ben from patternprofits.net bringing you the weekly watch list. We're looking at IWOR proxy for small cap growth, making some progress to the upside in the pinch here, coming up towards the top of that pinch and get rejected late last week at 5065 MA cloud here. You do have a descending trend line just above, volume shelf point of control just above as well. So still some work to do here, but it is steadily making some upside progress, and that's what we were looking for going back. Getting right into our weekly watch list, I'm encouraged this week as we have more focus list names that are looking good, more so than we've had recently. We've only really had a couple focus list names that were looking good over the last couple weeks, but we've got a few more. Playboy being one. Anchored VWAP from off of the high there, couldn't push through. It tried early in the session, got rejected, ended up closing below, so it's back in the pinch here. We do have the volume shelf point of control just below, was able to break through the descending trend line, so we're looking for that to make some upside progress, turn that anchored VWAP back to the upside. So we'll be looking at Playboy to see how that one acts early in the week. I do have a position still on there. UPST, this one we talked about a couple weeks back, and it did make the run as we discussed. 165.66, the pivot tried to push through but didn't put in a proper handle. The handle should be at least 5 to 7 days. This one was only a couple days. So looking for this to settle down, still looking for that handle to form. These big wide bars and wide range tells me there's a lot of emotion involved, so we look for that to get volume to lighten up a little bit as this goes sideways a little bit, tighten up the range, and then look for that push through to new highs. But right now, a lot of emotions involved, and this one would look a lot better for the longer term if it did settle down a little bit, form a proper handle right here. I also have Celsius, kind of like what we were looking at with UPST a couple weeks ago. We talked about it making this run up towards those prior highs, 70.66, the prior high, and then you have another pivot just below at 65.92 that it tried to clear and then was rejected late last week, closed below that level. I like to see the right side of these double bottoms actually shake out below the left. We don't have that here. But I do think if we can get a little pullback, like we were talking about with UPST, get a little pullback here, proper handle, take the next leg up, or get that handle up here, closer to that prior pivot, shake out those weak hands, and then push into new highs. That one would look good going forward. I also have TIGR. We talked about this one late last week. Was able to clear anchored VWAP from off of the high, get above and out of that pinch. You have a descending trend line here too. 23.30, the pivot here, pushed above just briefly late last week, closed back below, but still looks good. Nice volume coming into this name. So look for a push through that 23.30 pivot, and then you pretty much have blue skies up to those prior highs, prior high 38.50. So that's quite a nice run there. And in the same group, Futu, the two tend to run together. You're in the pinch, anchored VWAP off of the high and off of the prior low, and you're right there pushing up against anchored VWAP from off of the high. You do have volume shelf and point of control up a little bit higher with this one. So trying to push through that anchored VWAP would be step one. Get that to turn back up, but then it's also got to clear that volume shelf point of control. But if it does that, then you can look for a run towards those prior highs at 204.25. Additionally, Roku. Has been a while since I've had this one back on my radar. You have descending trend line from off of near those prior highs, it was actually able to clear that. And same thing as we were discussing with Futu, you in the VWAP pinch from off of the high, found support here off of the low. You're right up against that right now. Volume shelf pointer control just above 2. This will look great on strength if it comes up, turns that anchored VWAP back up. Either can grab coming through there, that's a more aggressive way, or the safer play, watching it come back in and retest that level before it makes the move higher. But Roku definitely one you want to keep on the radar. We also have TRGP Targa. This was on the watch list last week, 3 weeks tight, 39.28. This actually 3 weeks tight that turned into a 4 weeks tight, but still right below pivot at 39.28. We also have APO, which is very similar setup, 3 weeks tight. Had a little triangle pattern here, broke out through there, but hasn't been able to clear the 58.49 level for the 3 weeks tight yet. One more from that list that looked really good was Equifax. This was actually a power earnings gap name back here. Big volume, had the big gap, and then it really held that anchored VWAP from the gap very nicely, several tests. Now it's gone 3 weeks tight, so you'll look for move above 242.13 up here, or on a break of this descending trend line. If you bring volume by price over, you can see that you're right there at the volume shelf point of control. So this one can be managed very tightly using that level anchored VWAP too if it does go sideways a little bit longer. But I think that's a setup that could be managed very easily and very tightly. Crocs, another one that was on the watch list last week. We've got a hammer late last week right off of the volume shelf point of control. Anchored VWAP from off of the gap, power earnings gap again, big volume, nice move, and holding that well. We'll have to see if that hammer that was printed late Friday, if that confirms to the upside, but that's another one that can be managed very tightly. Another one that will have my attention next week, ZS, is another one that had a power earnings gap late last week. Looks a little different from the others because it's still within the base, but the power earnings gap here is just started, just below anchored VWAP from off that gap. You also have anchored VWAP from off the high, which it's turning up. You have a pivot here, 199.50, probably that 200 level. You could just use that as the pivot, but want to see if this can push through that 200 level, make some upside progress. You had the prior high up here above 230, so that would be a nice run back to those prior highs. This is what I was referring to with these double bottom type patterns. On the right side here, you did get the shakeout below and big strong recovery where it takes out this low. I always like to see that on the right side. We got that, so we'll just have to see if it can clear that 200 level. Volume shelf point of control just below, so this is another one that we'll be watching very closely. Can manage risk there very tightly on strength. Wouldn't want it if it rolls over here, stays below anchored VWAP, unless it came down to test this level, maybe give it a shot. In addition, and I shared this one late last week, DDS, Dillard's Retail, has been hot. I kind of like how tight this pattern is up here. You had power earnings gap, big volume, anchored VWAP from off of that gap has held. You also have a 128 pivot from the prior high, which is just below. If you bring the volume shelf over, you'll see volume by price over, you'll see the volume shelf and pointer controls just below that level. Again, can manage very tightly if it turns up. I only want this on strength, would not be interested if it rolls over below that level. But on strength, that one looks good to come out of that little coil. I have one more, my biotech friends, I always try to throw something your way when I see it. Bntx. This one can be managed very tightly. Volume shelf point of control, you're right there. You've got a little, I guess you'd call this more of like a pennant pattern up here, up high and tight. Look for that descending trend line to break through or just push into new highs. But this is one where the consolidation has gotten very quiet, volumes very quiet. You had the big volume back here, but looking for a more traditional breakout there. That's all I've got into next week. I hope you guys have a great trading week, and I will see you over on FinTwit.